So welcome everybody to this last edition of our spring cycle of seminars in digital and public humanities. And we end with another highlight. This is a second presentation by our visiting or ex-visiting scholar, Dániel Kiss, which I will introduce shortly. I will start with some very brief announcements here. First of all, so thank you again to Stefano Gallalio and De Bonaparte for organizing this excellent series. So that was a great success, and we already have confirmations of a nice series of experts for the autumn cycle, and we will publish this fairly soon. So watch this spot, or I mean, you will be informed via our usual channels. This presentation will be, as always, registered, recorded, and published on YouTube. So if you want to get back to the discussion or what Dániel is going to present, no worries. Everything will be accessible very soon on our YouTube channel. Other announcement, our master program is now open for registration, so please check our website or the university website. Maybe someone can also post the link into the chat and share information about our master program in digital and public humanities. So I think it's a very special profile, and we had a first successful year. I think tomorrow we will meet the students. I hope they can confirm that this was a nice study program so far. So in digital and public humanities, and there will be again an excellent team of teachers, so the colleagues at the center, but also external experts, including a number of visiting professors also in the next year. Unfortunately, there will be no summer school this year, so we decided not to plan a summer school due to the insecure and difficult situation still into the summer due to COVID, but we promise next year, if nothing, so if we don't have a fallback into a pandemic situation, to have a wonderful summer school in the next year. I want you to remind also that we do finish with this seminar or spring series. In parallel, we started a special series on technical art history, and we had a wonderful seminar yesterday. If someone can post the link information about that into the chat on advanced imaging technologies applied to cultural heritage objects, organized by our visiting professor Erma Hermans. So if you're interested in this, you're very welcome to follow the next 2 or 3 events. There will be more information published soon as well. And the last thing, we will have 2 or 3 book publication presentations by team members, colleagues from the center, and this will also be published, or is already in the course of being published. I don't know, Elisa, are we online already with information about these events? So yeah, have a look at our website and on Twitter and Instagram, and you will find all the information. So now I'm very happy to introduce once again Dániel Kiss. Dániel studied classics and Persian at the University of Oxford. He then came to Italy and has been awarded a doctoral degree in Latin philology by the Scuola Normale Superiore di Pisa. As a graduate student, he discovered a neglected archive of philological notes at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, which led him to embark on a longer research initiative on the poems of Catullus, and finally to construct also Catullus Online, what he will be reporting on today on the last developments. This is a pioneering digital critical edition of a major work of Latin literature. As I said, he has spent the past year as a virtual visual scholar at our center here in Venice, and we hope we will have you in presence in autumn, winter, and spring next year in some other way. Despite the difficulties and inconveniences due to COVID, he evolved a great range of activities at our center and department, including a series of seminars bringing back to life from the graveyards of variants and false emanations, so to say, the voices and discussions of great Catullus philologists across the centuries. So that was really fascinating. And he's now working as a Ramón y Cajal Fellow, I hope I pronounced this correctly, at the University of Barcelona. So congratulations for this new position. And here and now he will reflect on yet another existential question: Catullus Online and Digital Latin, radical innovation, or just, I'd add, media change. So Daniel, thank you for this presentation, and we look forward to a lively discussion afterwards.
Thank you very much for this introduction, Franz. I hope that you can all hear me clearly.
Yeah.
I'll move a little closer to the computer. It has been a pleasure to spend the year at the Venice Centre for Digital and Public Humanities, and I'm very, very grateful for all that I've learned there in a wonderful setting, and also for being able to put to fairly good use this very strange year that's behind us. I think there are worse ways to pass a pandemic than what we have done. It hasn't been easy, but still, if you do some meaningful work, then that's a way to overcome unusual situations. I'll hold a presentation today that presumes no previous knowledge of Latin, no previous knowledge of philology, and no previous knowledge of what I have said before about this subject. I apologize in advance to those of you who have heard bits and pieces of this, of my paper before. I try to focus on the big picture now. So I start out from my own background, my own work on Catullus Online, and I try to indicate the directions into which digital Latin and digital textual scholarship, perhaps in other fields too, should be pushed. As Franz said, I studied classics and Persian, and I ended up pursuing a professional career as a Latinist researcher. So I am, I suppose, a traditional paper-based scholar who, not entirely by accident, found himself in digital textual scholarship. So I'll share my screen now, my presentation. Let's see. Opa. Yes. All right. So you can see the first screen. Excellent. Radical innovation or media change. Media change is a traditional way of philological way, in my view, of viewing what's going on in digital textual scholarship. And the question of my paper is, the basic underlying question is, how can we go beyond this paradigm of media change, of taking texts simply from one medium and transferring them in an efficient way into another one? Anyhow, my personal venture into digital Latin has been through Catullus Online. What is Catullus Online? It starts out with this man, Gaius Valerius Catullus, who was born in northern Italy around Verona in the late 80s, and he died in Rome, probably in the late 50s BCE, died as a young man. And here you see a Roman fresco fragment from Sirmione near Verona, which quite likely depicts Catullus himself. You see a young man in contemporary dress, in a toga from the 1st century BC, holding a book roll in his hands. And this painting was made around the year 0, so about half a century after Catullus died, in a villa that probably belonged to a rich descendant or a rich relative of the poet. He wrote short and mid-length poems on love, hate, friendship, myth, poetry, and politics, and other subjects. And I would say that his poems are considered some of the masterpieces of Roman poetry, and they're also quite unusual in that they are the only example of personal poetry from this era, the 50s BCE, to reach us. They are a limited corpus, so here I have a printed edition of all of them, a thin volume it is, so about 116 poems and about 5 fragments that have reached us through other paths than the medieval and Renaissance manuscript tradition, comprising a little over 2,000 verses. So if you work on this, it's much and it's complex material, but you're not crippled. It's not 20,000 or 200,000 verses. That would be quite a lot. It's highly corrupt. It has reached us in the manuscripts, in the source manuscripts, in a highly corrupt form. I'll come back in a moment to what this means. The sources are about 124 manuscripts. Much depends on what we regard as manuscripts and what we don't. But anyway, that's a minor issue here, including one anthology from the 9th century. And manuscripts are known by their initial letters called sigla. So this is T, but T only contains 1 poem. And the first manuscripts that contain the entire collection come from the 14th century, and then 120 are from the end of the 14th century, or mainly from the 15th and the 16th. And most of them were written in Renaissance Italy. And in fact, one of the earliest ones was written in Venice on the Rialto. And another source of the poems of Catullus is a group of 100 ancient and medieval quotations or testimonia. What does it mean that this is a corrupt text? Here we have the oldest of the full manuscripts of Catullus, or a detail of a page from it. It's called the Codex Oxoniensis because it's in the Bodleian Library in Oxford. And I will concentrate on the lines that follow the break. This is poem 4 of Catullus, the start of poem 4, about a little boat called a Pasellus. You can just about make out Pasellus after the gap in the text, where a title should have been added, but it was not. You see, by the way, that in the left margin, an early hand, so probably not the scribe who copied the text, but someone at an early date added the word Silva, which was missing there. How does this text stand in and now I must manipulate my screen so that I can actually read my translation. So it reads, Pasellus ille quem videtis hospites, a beautiful, pure iambic line, aiunt fuisse navium celerrimum, nec villius natantis impetum tardis, there the Latin meter breaks down, nec vesse praeterire sine palmulis opus foret volare sine linteu, et hoc negat mina ei Adriatici, and here we run into trouble because the Latin is hard to pronounce, hard to scan as verse, and extremely hard to make sense of. So I read the translation. The little boat that you see, friends, they say that it was the fastest of ships. It is missing in the text, and nor the speed of that swimming one for the late ones, nor to pass by without little oars. One should need to fly without a sail, and therefore it denies threat to it of the Adriatic, to deny the coast. So this is word salad. It doesn't make any sense. This is a miserable mess that we find in the best manuscripts of this ancient Latin text. to deny the coast, the island, and the word that one cannot make sense of, and the noble roads, and the drawn rough propontis, or the green prontic, and another word that doesn't make any sense, and yet another. Later a boat, earlier it was a hairy, and then the marginal hand added the word forest, a hairy forest, for another nonsense word. On the yoke, it often gave out a hiss with its vocal foliage. So bits and pieces of the text make sense, or scan, or both, but much of it is complete nonsense. Evidently, this is not the original text, because Catullus wasn't completely crazy. He could express himself in correct and even very elegant Latin, and he could write in perfect meter. And so this is just not what he wrote. The text was distorted through many, many turns of manual copying in the manuscript tradition. And as you see, this manuscript dates from almost 1.5 millennium up from after the time the original text was written. Actually, this might look like a disaster area, but it is a disaster area that has been cleared up because this stretch of Catullus's poetry has been corrected, to my mind, quite convincingly. And here you see in the left column, in red, indicated the scholarly corrections, and in green, the corrections from other authoritative manuscripts from the 14th century. So where those bits of the text were not corrupted, you can use those authoritative manuscripts to correct the text, but otherwise you have to make learned guesses, which are called conjectures. And I'll just read the start of the text. Facellus ille quem videtis hospites, ait fuisse navium celerrimus, nec vullius natantis, impetum trabis, nec visse praeterire, sive palmulis opus foret volare, sive linteu. The little boat that you see, friends, says that it has been the fastest of ships, nor has it been unable to surpass the speed of any floating hull, whether it would have to fly with little oars or with a sail. So it makes sense. And in the second half of this passage, the route of the ship from the Black Sea to the Adriatic to northern Italy, the area of Verona, is described quite accurately in this scholarly reconstruction. How come that the text was restored? So here is an overview of the corrections of all those who corrected this text. There are 3 passages that are transmitted correctly in other authoritative manuscripts. Then 4 have been corrected in 15th century manuscripts. So anonymous humanists who produced or collaborated in the production of these Renaissance Italian manuscripts corrected these readings. 4 passages were corrected by early 15th century editors and scholars working on Catullus, and 1 rather devious problem was corrected in the 20th century by, I think, a Scottish scholar, J.A.K. Thompson. So, this is a success story. The patient was very ill, but she has recovered and she's doing very well. And elsewhere in the text of Catullus, the situation is not so good, and we need a lot of corrections to make. My discovery, mentioned by Franz when he introduced me, was this archive of the collations of William Gardner Hale and Berthold Ullmann of the Renaissance manuscripts of Catullus, conserved in the Department of Classics at Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Excellent philological collations, conserving the data of the readings of these manuscripts on flaky booklets printed in 1906 onto paper that's now flaky and falling apart. And I discovered this wonderful resource. It's the product of many years of hard work by excellent scholars. Berthold Ullmann was one of the best Latinists of the early 20th century. And I decided to get to work with the help of this resource to reconstruct the text of Catullus by drawing up a repertory of conjectures. my idea was to draw up a repertory of conjectures of Catullus, so gather all the ideas that have ever been made to correct the text, because these are learned guesses. They are made fundamentally in the same way now as they were made in the Renaissance. I decided to publish these online because that would be a more convenient and more accessible format. You can check it in the middle of the night. You can check it from wherever in the world you are, where you have an internet connection. Conventionally, traditionally, repertories of conjectures were published in rather expensive academic books, printed in few copies, a few hundred copies. And you can accompany this repertory of conjectures with a text of the poems. So then you have a digital critical edition. And you can add further material, including manuscript images and testimonia, those ancient quotations of Catullus that I mentioned. I got funds for this from the Ludwig Maximilians Universität München, which received a chunk of excellence funding from the German states and the government of the Federal Republic of Germany. I'm very grateful for this. It was a major sum, and I could work mostly on this project for twice 2 years. It was my first postdoctoral project, and I'm very grateful for the Center for Advanced Studies in Munich for all their support. And let's see, this is perhaps the right time to shift screens and to show what I did with Catullus Online, what it looks like. So this is what I created. Can you see it? Yes. So my objectives were twofold. It has taken me some time to explain to you what is a repertory of conjectures, and that is the body of notes here in the right column. It's an enormous quantity, about 15 to 20,000 textual variants, with even more bibliographic and manuscript references. And it's of use to specialist scholars who try to understand the transmission of the text and who try to reconstruct it better than we have reconstructed it so far. Reconstructing it is a process where it hasn't been as successful as with the start of poem 4. We need these ideas to move on. But you can actually hide the apparatus and you can get a reading view of the poems. I wanted to have a beautiful and legible text which you could enjoy because it's beautiful literature. It's there to be read, it's there to be enjoyed. And here you can open the variants on each line one by one. You can access images to the manuscripts of each line, and you can access the ancient quotations of those lines. There are quite a few quotations of this stretch at the start of the poems of Catullus. There is also an immense bibliography, about over 900 titles at the moment, and there is a separate edition of the ancient quotations, the Testimonia, and a gallery of the manuscripts. And so the contents are fairly rich in philological terms. They are not structured in a complex digital way. And currently, with the help of Daniele Fusi, I am, or sometimes when I'm not teaching, I am working on the upgrade of the Catullus Online to a more complex format. Hopefully, we will have a more complex and more rich encoding. Anyway, this is what I wanted to show of the website. You are welcome to explore it on your own, and I will go back to my presentation. Let's see. Okay, here we are. So the construction of Catullus Online was done on a commercial basis. I didn't know I knew hardly anything about digital humanities when I started this project. It was a homegrown project, I must say. And also I wanted to keep it very simple because I was concerned that complexity would make me run out of my time frame, and also it might produce something that might not function, or that might not function with the browsers of the future. And as you see, 8 years after Catullus Online was inaugurated, it still works more or less fine. And it was constructed by a small commercial software firm in Hungary. It's surprisingly hard to find a commercial firm to make it, but they did a good job. And the visual design was done by a visual design studio here in Budapest. The technical parameters, that it's a MySQL database with additional programming in PHP and a very basic format. So the critical apparatus is encoded as text. There is no markup, and it's certainly not compatible with DEI criteria. But the material is linked internally, and there is also a search function, which I hadn't shown. There is a jump function. You can go to a given stretch in the text. The academic usage of it has been, I must say, better than I expected. There have been 2 reviews of Catullus Online in books and 2 reviews on scholarly blogs. Perhaps not as much as what one would get if one would publish such a resource on paper, but still not bad. And it has received more than 40 quotations to date in academic literature, which is not bad at all, I would argue, not bad at all. I've received a lot of positive feedback, and from a senior scholar in my field, I've also received, actually before a job interview, for a job which I didn't get, the comment, "I hope that you haven't made a disgusting website." So the implication is, this is the idea of some of my colleagues in traditional textual scholarship, that websites can be disgusting. It's not that some websites are disgusting, but websites, there is something wrong with publishing philological material online. And the overall usage, the last time I did a detailed survey was, I'm sorry, this is not up to date, but you get the picture, a little under 30,000 single users from a little under 140 countries and territories of the world, all over the world. And I'm a little skeptical about Google's count of the single users. They surely don't always correspond to individuals, but it's more telling that on Facebook, Catullus Online has received over 1,000 likes. So the usage of it is into the thousands and probably into the tens of thousands of people, which is, I think, very good for a philological publication. And it has fulfilled the objective of reaching a much broader public than the narrow group of specialists who would be interested in the arcana of textual research on Catullus. With this and with my research on various aspects of Latin philology, I found myself thinking about digital Latin as media change. Media change is if you take a text from one media, in this case, printed books, and transfer it into another media, in this case, a digital format. In the transmission, the long history of classical Latin literature, we had 3 such cases of media change. In the first half of the first millennium, about the first half of the first millennium, that's perhaps the most accurate formulation, texts were copied from the book roll to the manuscript codex. And I won't talk much about this process because we only know this in outline. Our sources are not very rich on this process. And in around the year 1500, classical Latin literature was transferred from the manuscript codex, so from handwritten books, to the printed book. It was printed for the first time. And now, in our days, it passes from the printed book to a digital format. And the comparison of the internet to the introduction of printing is commonplace. But I think that it might still be worthwhile to revisit this comparison, because we might have something more to learn from it. What is the reality of media change today? It's this. On the left, you see an image. Oh, I'm sorry, it's not entirely sharp, of Gianbiagio Conte's critical edition of the Aeneid. I think it appeared in 2007. And on the right, you see Musisque Deuque Digital Library's edition of the same part of the start, the first verses of Virgil's Aeneid. You see that the Conte's edition has a very rich, typographically structured, articulated critical apparatus, and actually Musisque Deuque has a much more thin and selective critical apparatus, but it also has one. But Musisque Deuque is an exception, and arguably the reality of media change today looks more like this. One of the most commonly read digital texts is that digital libraries is the Persius classical library, and there the Aeneid starts like this. And while Musisque Deuque follows Mario J. Monat's 2008 edition of the Aeneid, which is a little conservative to my taste, but certainly a very good edition. Persius, for reasons of copyright, follows Greenaw's 1900 edition, so a dated edition of the text, and there are no critical notes. So this is not a high value philological text, and probably the lack of the fact that you could copy a text that's out of copyright has been preferred to the trouble of getting the permission to use a high value, up-to-date, state-of-the-art modern edition. What was the reality of media change in 1472 when Catullus's Editio Princeps, his first printed edition, appeared? You see here on the right Catullus's first printed edition. And once again, I shall quote Francis' introduction of this talk. He mentioned great scholars of great Catullan scholars of the past, and this printed edition was prepared by a scholar who I would not call great. He was hired by the printer for the occasion. The printer was Wendelin of Speyer, Vindelino de Spira, working in Venice. The first printers working in Venice were Wendelin and his brother, immigrants from Germany who brought this newly invented trade across the Alps. And Wendelin contracted Girolamo Squarzafico from Alessandria in the Piedmont, a minor scholar with an unsettled lifestyle and a liking for wine, who prepared an edition of Catullus that is regarded as questionable. And I personally don't regard it as a disaster, but it contains lots and lots of mistakes. If you compare it, the edition, the visual aspect of the first printed edition of Catullus here with a manuscript from the 1st century, from an earlier part of the same century. The manuscript was copied around 1423. You see that in visual terms, the manuscript, the printed edition sticks closely to the format of the manuscript. It leaves big spaces open for decorated, illuminated initial letters, and and the text is laid out in the same way as in a manuscript, but of course printers can only use one color while scribes can use several. So the traditional way of articulating the text with the help of color is lost. What is also lost is quality control, because manuscripts are often copied by learned scribes, and they are very, very often corrected against their exemplar. So the scribe or someone else takes the copy and compares it to the model, eliminates any mistakes. And the first printers, such as Wendelin, working for us in Venice, were working in a hurry with an adventure mentality. They wanted to turn a quick profit, so they didn't have time for proofreading. There were other technical reasons as well. They didn't have enough letters to set a whole book into print, so they had to set part of the book to type, correct it very, very quickly, if at all, print it, and then print the rest. They had a very quick rhythm of printing. The result was a mess in terms of philology. This quickly evoked criticism. Niccolò Perotti, a well-known humanist of the 15th century and an archbishop, a Catholic archbishop as he later became, wrote in a letter to Francesco Guarini about this problem. He commented, "Now that anybody is able to print whatever he wishes according to his whim, people ignore texts of a high quality and they write, that is to say they print, that what would deserve to be blotted out and deleted altogether from every single book. And if they happen to write something that is of value, they pervert and corrupt it in such a way that it would be better to go without these books altogether than to have 1,000 copies of them sent to every region of the world, so that the learned should not be able to read such a large number of lies." This might ring familiar to us from today's world, due to the association of the internet with fake news. And also Perotti called in the same letter for censorship to ensure that the new technology is not used to spread deceitful information. Another person who commented on this problem was Johannes Calphurnius, a reputable scholar from northern Italy. In the preface to his edition of Catullus of 1481, he wrote, so the preface was printed after the text, and he had seen the text, and he concluded, "I decided to have nothing more to do with printers in the future, because since when they receive a corrected text, they have the habit of turning it upside down and altering it. So if you find any omissions or alterations, please ascribe these not to me, but to the printers." And his rant continues, and he specifies the passages that these unscrupulous printers have ruined in his edition. It must not have been a pleasure to set to type these words. In short, early printed books had a number of shortcomings. Their layout imitated manuscripts unsuccessfully. They had a bulky, inconvenient format. I didn't mention this, but the first editions of Catullus were very heavy folios. They weighed several kilos. They were often based on inferior manuscripts or inferior printed editions. They often lacked proper textual editing and often lacked effective proofreading. And these material shortcomings were connected to institutional shortcomings. The first printers in Europe had an adventure mentality. The atmosphere was that of a gold rush. Wendelin of Speyer, who printed this text of Catullus, went to Italy because that was where scholarship and learning was flowering the most, and he hoped to become rich with the help by selling books to Italian scholars. He didn't, actually. He failed. He went bankrupt, or nearly so. It was not integrated. The world of printing was not integrated with the world of textual scholarship. And there was an uncritical imitation of superficial features of manuscripts, for example, their layout, but not of some deeper characteristics, such as correction mechanisms and quality control. So there was a lack of integration with the existing world of scholarship, and also an imperfect use of the possibilities offered by the new medium. And this was solved a generation later by a man called Aldus Manutius, who set up in Venice a wonderful printing house called the Aldine Press. And here you see in my hand the Aldine edition of Catullus, Tibullus, and Propertius. It's a very convenient and pretty little book in elegant type, and the layout has been improved. It's much more transparent. You still have spaces for illuminated initials if you want to add them, but if you don't add them, then you can still make sense of this text. And the quality has also been improved. So this edition of Catullus was curated by Aldus Manutius, who was an obsessive editor and scholar himself, with the help of Hieronymus Avancius Girolamo Avanzi, one of the best scholars of the time working on Catullus. Why did this press succeed? Because of their fine typography and careful layout, their attention to visual shaping, their convenient but not cheap pocketbooks, the fact that they contracted competent scholars as editors, and they used good manuscripts as models and paid obsessive attention to proofreading. The director of the press, Aldo Manuscio himself, read the proofs. You see an attention to all the phases of the production process, but also an integration with the world of scholarship. Actually, Aldo himself, Aldus Manutius, the director of the printing house himself, was a minor scholar. What is the reality of media change today? Well, how does quantity relate to quality? In classical Latin literature, in classical Latin online, digital copies of classical Latin texts are widely available. Most classical Latin texts, except for some very, very, very obscure ones, can be found in some form online. A few important texts are not available, but they are really the exception. However, digital editions curated by scholars, so with a kind of quality control, are available only occasionally. Digital critical editions are also available only occasionally. And born digital critical editions are very rare. And my early work on Catullus has been a born digital critical edition, and Linda Spinazze's critical edition of Maximian, published through Musicque Deuque here in Venice in 2012, is another rare example. So here too we see quantity winning from quality. Traditional textual scholars, who in the case of classical Latin are very concerned with accuracy, are understandably concerned. And Richard Tarrant, one of the most renowned Latin philologists alive today, wrote in his book Texts, Editors and Readers, what happens to textual criticism's focus on establishing the most reliable possible text in an environment in which texts circulate in electronic form and are downloaded from out-of-date or uncritical editions? In some respects, the use of electronic databases, the use of electronic databases marks a return to conditions in the early days of printing, when editions of classical texts were usually reproductions of late manuscripts of no special merit. And the logical next step would be to try to put this situation right, to try to ensure that we don't go down that path of an abundance of unreliable texts available online. But Tarrant doesn't make that step in his reasoning. He deplores the situation of Latin online without offering a remedy. What should we do? What is there to be done? My first priority would be to integrate digital editing with the world of textual scholarship. And for all digital textual scholars, I think it's commandment number one to take into account of all knowledge that there is, traditional paper-based scholarship as well. Point two is to reflect critically on the possibilities and the limitations of digital editions. That includes the readiness to let go book format, traditional book format, the limitations of paper-based books, because digital books have different limits. We shouldn't imitate on a computer what is being done on the printed page. And for me, only the third priority is to develop appropriate infrastructure and resources, because these should reflect the actual needs and the needs and the requirements of the discipline. So we need infrastructure that is suited to the philological contents, as well as the possibilities of the new digital media. But is media change really a good and satisfactory way of seeing digital textual scholarship? I'm not so sure. Media change involves a transfer of data to a new medium. It's a very disruptive process, as we know from the work of Marshall McLuhan. But is it not better to see digital textual scholarship as, at least possibly, a new technology that offers new ways to generate knowledge from data? In fact, it already does so. One way in which digital technology supports textual scholarship today is by searches. And using search engines belongs to the research routine of, I believe, a vast majority of textual scholars today. You know that there are search engines such as Google that conduct indiscriminate searches, and even these might be very, very useful for a textual problem. And then there are specific digital libraries. In the case of classical Latin, for example, PHI Latin and Brave Pulse, which offer focused searches. And this is something that's actually an ancient practice in textual scholarship, in classical Latin textual scholarship. It's nothing new. Searching for parallels is nothing new. Here you see a selection from Giovan Antonio Volpi's 1737 commentary, printed in Padua, near Venice. Once again, we're in the same area, on Catullus 4, line 15. And you see here parallels from Cornelius Nepos, Cicero, the Rhetorica ad Herennium, and once again, Cicero. Classical Latin research lives, it flourishes due to this kind of material. And here is another example of searching for parallels. This is a screenshot from part of the wonderful Thesaurus Linguae Latinae, which has been under construction for more than a century. And I selected this because of a word that's only found in Catullus, reflagito, to demand back. It's not used anywhere else in classical Latin, as you see here. And as you see, the Thesaurus Linguae Latinae works by starting out from it's a dictionary which offers mostly a full list of the occurrences of every word, a reasoned list of the occurrences of every word in classical Latin, and sometimes it's a selective list. And it was prepared through paper-based research, by searching, by writing down every word in every classical Latin text on a little piece of paper and sorting through these pieces of paper. But now its associates, its collaborators also use digital methods. And this might seem trivial, but it's precious. It's precious for textual scholars. Here you see this search for reflagito, reflagitare, the same rare word that I showed in the Thesaurus on Catullus Online. So you can do the same search. And here you see the same search conducted on PHI Latin texts. Really, no more occurrences of this word appear. What digital resources do we need for classical Latin? I apologize for the omission. Here is my wish list. We really need digital critical editions, editions representing the reconstructed texts according to our best knowledge, and the source materials and the scholarly conjectures on which these reconstructions are based. And a team at Venice has been working for decades on preparing good digital critical editions. That's a great work. But I also believe that we need a comprehensive searchable corpus of digital Latin. And starting out from that material, we could conduct research on classical Latin as in corpus linguistics and apply software for stylistic, metrical, or linguistic study. And you could go on imagining what we need. To elaborate a little on my points, a tally of digital critical editions of classical Latin is pretty short. Musisque Deuque, Catullus Online, and now the nascent Digital Latin Library, based at the University of Oklahoma in the USA, are 3 examples. And Michael Hendry, who I believe is in the audience, has also prepared some digital critical editions. What is missing, except for Musisque Deuque and now the Digital Latin Library, is strong institutional backing. So I'm delighted that Ca' Foscari University has been backing such a valuable project. As for the structure of digital critical editions, we are also at an interesting juncture because the Text Encoding Initiative has offered articulated, elaborate criteria, but those structure the edition as a base text to which variants are appended. But critical editions are structured conceptually as a garden of forked paths. A variant reading means that you could, in principle, adopt that reading and then think of the possibilities of the consequences. So the principle of tiled texts developed by the Musisque Deuque team and elaborated further by Daniele Fusi in Venice is very, very useful, very appropriate to the philological contents of these editions. What about searchable corpora of classical Latin? And I'll just show you a tally. There are several partial corpora of literary texts, and to name just 3, the PHI Latin texts, the Persius Digital Library, and the Brepos Library of Latin Texts, which is actually a commercial library. You have to pay to access it. So much for literary Latin transmitted in manuscripts, but inscriptions on stone appear in a different database altogether, an excellent database, but not connected to the former, the Epigraphische Datenbank Claus Slavi. And it makes some sense because inscriptions, epigraphic texts, have very different writing conventions and uses, but it's still a pity that the 2 are not linked. And papyri, so documents found in ancient Egypt, are conserved in a 3rd database, in a 3rd group of databases. Papyri.info is, I believe, the most important one. So there is no comprehensive corpus. Why is there none? Why is there no comprehensive digital corpus of classical Latin texts? I end my talk with this question. I think there should be one. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed. Oh, here's my microphone. Sorry. Daniel, for this excellent introduction into the critical philology, textual criticism at its best. So, I mean, you are a representative of this high tradition of criticizing text and producing edition of highest quality. Yeah, the floor is now open for questions. So I see philologists, but this is interdisciplinary seminar, so please ask simple questions to understand better what you might, where you have difficulties to understand, and yeah.
Difficult questions are also very welcome.
Yeah, usually these are the hardcore questions then in the end. You can write your, yeah, there's Michael, yeah, I was suggesting so you can just leave a note in the chat and I can give you the voice. Otherwise, just shout. We are a small group today, so that's no problem. Michael, please go ahead.
Okay, I have a question. Something I have always wanted is a database of variants that one could search. Once I was working on a line of Ovid, and I was trying to find a fruit or vegetable that was trochaic in the accusative and began and end with a vowel, and I couldn't find one. And I wonder, perhaps there is somewhere and even just something that would show you, okay, accusatives that are trochaic in the singular plural that are trochaic and begin and end with a vowel. There can't be that many of them, but and then, of course, things like, I've seen yam and nam confused before. Where was that? I would like to be able to quote other places where these words have been confused. And again, searching for every yam or nam in Latin literature and looking up the apparatus is just not very efficient. And so if a database of text also had an actual searchable database of variants, that would be wonderful. And I've experimented with, I haven't got very far because I'm getting a little old to be programming, not very efficient at it. I experimented with having texts where every variant is in the database, and it's just for a particular word in a particular line, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 variants, and number 1 is the one that you see. And you could, in fact, make, my dream is that you could allow people to make their own text and just say that in position number 1, I want variant number 2. In position number 3, I want variant number 6. And your text would be Catullus 14 and code AAAB, AAAC, AAAA, that would indicate that your text selects those different variants in those locations, and ideally the database would then tell you you've just recreated the OCT, so don't claim that as your own. Okay, you see what I'm saying? So anyway, I'm just saying there are more things that that a text database could do if you can get the variants right into the database in searchable ways. With and also needs long marks. It really this sort of thing, if the macrons are in the text, would really help. And anyway, that's just, I need to write that up. But the other thing, since it's a small group, what was it? I wanted to ask, for your reworking your own Catullus Online, have you thought of allowing a screening of variants? Because if you look on the Horace database, the one other place where you can get all the conjectures, the Oslo Horace database, if you look in the epodes, you'll find that half of all the conjectures on the epodes are by Teichmuller 1911, and Teichmuller was an idiot. I mean, they're just completely horrible, useless. I have yet to find one that's even interesting, much less plausible. And so if there was someone like that in Catullus, if the apparatus could, you say, just don't bother to show me any of the Teichmullers. Okay. And I suppose some people would say, oh, and boldface all the Shackleton Baileys or the Bentleys or whoever. In other words, have you thought of making your apparatus kind of screenable, filterable?
Michael, I'll start with your second point, because it focuses on what is actually there on Catullus Online. And it started out as a repertory of conjectures, and the repertory of conjectures is like a full variorum edition. It's like a people's assembly where every single citizen can be admitted. So there is no legitimate reason to throw out any conjecture, except that I have set very generous criteria for the inclusion of manuscript material by scholars who are not alive, because otherwise, you know, if it would be possible to use Catullus Online as the first place of publication to publish something that occurred to you yesterday, then there would be no quality control, as you said, but even less so. So, and I wanted to prevent that, because in a repertory of conjectures, you cannot use quality screening, but you can choose the technical criteria. So I aim to include everything that has ever been printed, and a generous amount of manuscript material, especially by scholars who are no longer alive. And scholars who are alive are encouraged to publish their conjectures in peer-reviewed journals or wherever, in any other comparable source. So it arose from that. But I take your point, and there is a lot to be said for selection and screening. And you know, it's not the case that the more material we have, the better it is. There are situations in life, many situations in life, when you are helped by a pre-selection, and printed critical editions use that previous selection. The critical apparatus of a printed edition will have a few % of the material that I included in Catullus Online. So yeah.
Well, I'm not suggesting that they not be in the database, but that users could choose to not see. If they say, could a user choose not to see some of them? Or could a user say, just show me, a very conservative user, say, just show me all the manuscript variants. I don't want to see any of the conjectures. You see what I say? That, in other words, if a user could tailor their view of your apparatus, yes, to see more or less, and also if you could sort them by date, or you could also sort them like from left to right, show me all the variants on the first word and on the first and second, and then on only the second, and so on, and then arrange those in order. You see what I'm saying? It's I'm just wondering if you're doing that kind of thing with the changes.
My life is my resources are not enough, I think, for many of the options. And
yeah, I will send you.
As you said, I'm not a programmer, and even if I were, I believe it would be very, very hard work. Paolo Monella, who has just rejoined us, I think he has experimented with different densities of apparatus, and perhaps others in this group too. So I think it's fair, it's legitimate to experiment, but there is always a price to pay. You will to travel the road, and the road might be quite long. But yes, there is something to be said for screening variants. And I really like your other comment about your own wish list, so to say, about creating a database for textual variants. That would be very, very interesting. And I don't know whether you meant to imply computerizing the process of textual criticism, but there definitely is a possibility there, because you know, textual criticism and reconstructing ancient texts is similar on a remotely similar to solving crossword puzzles. You know, there is a gap of 5 letters or 2 metrical units or whatever, or a syntactical unit in a prose text, and you have to find a gap for it. And you know, computers are not good at some parts of this process. They are not good at assessing whether a line of poetry is elegant or it's ugly, because it's very hard to formalize that process. But they are very good at they would be very good at formalizing other parts. So even at comparing to looking for another variant that's very similar to this word, or that's likely to be corrupted into it. So yes, I think there's a lot of scope for digital technology there, and the challenge is to do it, and to make that, and to also to bring this discipline to a level at which such things can routinely happen. So I think we need more traditional scholars come over into the digital realm for these things to work really, really well. And I would really not be surprised if in a couple of decades we got there. I would not at all be surprised. I think we have to work on it, but it's within reach.
It's taking a lot longer than I thought it would. To, for instance, the Catullus and Horace repertories, I kind of hope people would start putting together similar ones for other authors, but that is, those two have been around for a few years, and I just would like one for Virgil and for Persian and so on. And I don't know if someone could design a format, a convenient format for that kind of thing. If you could, because I know Stephen Hayworth told me 20 years ago he was thinking of updating the Thesaurus Criticus, listing all the Propertius conjectures. And if there were a convenient format, I would think maybe write to him and ask him if he's got the 3x5 cards, maybe someone else could type them all in and make a very, and make it online this time. So anyway, but
Humanities knows all about convenient formats. So I think that we are there.
Yes. Anyway, I hope someone else has some questions, but I need to. I'll email you anything else I have to say. Okay. Thank you.
More questions. That Paolo Monella turned into Tiziana Mancinella, which is not a problem. So you're very welcome, Tiziana.
Paolo left, and I think he returned, but he might have.
Oh, that was Tiziana was.
No, that's.
Okay, other questions from,
Perhaps the talk was not provocative enough for once, Franz. And I wonder, I wonder whether many of the things that digital textual scholars regard as new are in fact not quite old. As a classical scholar, you get this feeling quite often that someone says this is very new, and then I read it in Cicero, or I read it in Aristotle. But especially treating texts as data is, I think, conceptually, the concept of treating texts as data is essential to classical philology. The question is how we can do this well, and how can we integrate this well to digital processes. And but perhaps I tried to provoke, but perhaps it was not wide enough.
Yeah, we have only few traditional scholars here and not too many digital scholars who follow a new paradigm or the new philology. I mean, this almost traditional conflict or confrontation of new approaches to text. I mean, you are, as a classical scholar who also deals with poems, poetry. So this is your idea of text is very Platonic in a way. So you really have this project to reconstruct an ideal version of a text. And I mean, I from a medieval Latin background have many other alternative perspectives on textuality. So the material aspects of textuality, paleography, which you wouldn't be able to represent in a book. So there you really depend on the representation of lots of layers of textual information and to develop new methodologies. So for classical philology, I think it's more really like just a change from one media to another, whereas the methodology is the same. And I mean, there is maybe this perspective you can at least try to make your editorial decisions explicit to or make a record of those and then reproduce or have a better documentation, be more transparent in your editorial decisions. And that would be a process also in quality. Apart from this, I mean, you wouldn't blame the medium for the quality of the product. That
of course.
I mean, that was a nice parallel to the change from manuscript culture to print culture, that the first products were of low quality, but you wouldn't blame today print as a medium which is responsible for low quality. So you wouldn't do this today neither, because it depends on the editor. It's not a question of the medium. If you produce high quality texts or low quality texts. So one question I would have, because you thought we have to be very aware of the limits of the media. So then I always look, okay, the book obviously has lots of limits. Where do you see the limits of the digital medium? Because you use the plural. There are, of course, but yeah.
No.
Yeah.
No. Well, it's debated, but I think it's quite common to use media, singular and plural, for forms of communication. And in Hungarian, at any rate, medium is the parapsychological person who sees through the soil and do such things. But anyhow. So what's the limits of the digital medium? I think the human, so the human behind it, that, you know, computers are ultimately machines, and you have to create an algorithm to process, or algorithms to process data and arrange for the input of data, either type it in yourself or create some sort of process that will feed the data into the digital machine, and humans are involved at all sorts of places within the process, and I think perhaps we forget too easily how important this is, because, you know, when we prepare a printed book, it's obvious to everybody that you need a lot of people involved, from the editor to the printer to the publisher to the bookseller, a lot of people, and yes, to pick up Francis, digital textual scholarship sometimes seems to be a platonic discipline. People forget the human work that's involved, and I think it's risky.
Can I ask Galaxy Tab? Oh, yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Good evening from Greece. I'm philologist from Greece, but the tablet has not my name.
Okay. No, there was just background noise, so that's why I was.
I know. I have been in Venice, and I'm studying here a master on papyrology, and now I begin to use digital way of humanities.
So
but I didn't attend all your lectures and your meetings, because
no
I'm very occupied here.
No problem. You're welcome. So more questions.
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
Comment. Yes,
yeah.
Fiona. My name is Fiona Maguire. I put the video on. I'd like to first thank you for a very interesting digital humanities series. The Ca' Foscari summer school and seminars are always illuminating. So I'd like to thank all of you and the organisers, of course, and not least today's presentation. I work on medieval Spanish late medieval Spanish, and have worked on digital editions for several years of medieval Spanish, where we transcribe paleographically diplomatic editions and collecting and creating variants. So we have the earlier question regarding could you have a database of variants using well, we use TEI, some basic TEI, and collate, the previous program and now collate X, you generate files of variants, and those files are searchable and can be made available. And also just by mousing over text, you can have the variants coming up as well as being searchable. So that's an approach. I would also draw your attention to project group James Cummings, who was at the University of Oxford. He's part of the TEI consortium. He's now at Newcastle University. He has a project animating text, and I'll just put the link in the chat now. In the TEI community, what is a digital scholarly edition is a prominent question, and various scholars have been addressing this. So I'd refer you to James Cummings' project, and perhaps from their other sources of work that this important question that you have raised is being discussed widely in the TEI community. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take note of the link. Fiona, thank you so much. It must be said that medievalists, I must say that medievalists are often a step ahead in the digital realm, ahead of classical scholars. Perhaps Michael Henry will agree, and I think that classical textual criticism is a very, very mature discipline, and also the corpus of texts is limited. We have a good paper-based critical edition of much of classical Latin literature now, and quite often several, and in many, many cases, such as that of Catullus, a rich and an enormous tradition of scholarship. And in medieval studies, you still find a lot of new material, as I understand it, and there are a lot more empty fields, and I think that has helped in digital medieval textual scholarship, and in classics, the fact that we have relatively few empty spaces in our discipline, or few unexplored spaces that might have held us back. Anyhow, we have a lot to learn from medievalists, and this also ties back to what Franz said about Platonic conception of reconstructed text. And I regard reconstructed ancient texts as hypotheses. So Plato was probably more confident than I am about reconstructing texts, but it's a different process.
Which is perfectly fine. I mean, that's no criticism. So I mean, it's a wonderful methodology. But so this goes very nicely along with the print world or format. So there is not so much to gain for a classical philologist changing the media or to work on data-driven editions, because you stick to the methodology that has been developed in the past 200, 300, 400 years. And there's not so much to gain. It's also to create a database of variants. So what do you, I mean, you established a way to present a huge amount of variants and conjectures. And so this was intellectual endeavor, so to embark on this project and to establish a way or a format to provide as much such an amount of information that you would not be able to include in a print format. So if someone follows now your example, there is not so much to merit in this way. Of course, it would be a very useful tool for everyone. So Michael is waiting for this, and I hope this will come, because everyone agrees this is useful. But then again, you have to deal with the resistance. The empire strikes back or does not share the information that is provided in the latest critical apparatus from editions of major publishing houses. So that's also a problem in medieval textual scholarship. I mean, the excellent editions of the Corpus Christianorum or the other Brepols editions are provided in electronic corpus, which is nice and very useful, but all the philological framework, that's all cut off, and you can't search for any variants, you can't copy it, you can't transform it into a database format that and make use of this. So there's a lot of problems and obstacles that will be detrimental to your wonderful idea to create and connect textual resources in corpora. And then, I mean, if we talk about texts, versions, reconstructions as you produce, Daniel, then of course a corpus is something that one can think can be put nicely together, because texts have the same status. They are not as complex and multi-layered as medieval digital editions, for example. What do you do with all these editions that are out there already in the digital? How do you put these editions together? I think it's not the format of a traditional corpus. We have to think this in a different way. The semantic web approaches, I think, are more productive here, and then where we get with these new resources or distributed resources that are then connected in some way, it wouldn't be the corpus we are used from the traditionally print corpus transposed in a new medium in the digital world. So it will be different, and then for this it will be more useful in its own right, but it is something different.
Franz, I'm a lot more optimistic than what you say. I think that there is just no conceptual reason why digital critical editions of classical Latin texts would be less satisfactory than printed critical editions. The thing is that printed critical editions are they're a mature medium, a mature genre. They are the product of centuries of development. So in the case of Catullus, the first critical editions that start looking familiar appear in the late 18th century, and then Lachmann's edition, 1829, is already, it looks basically the same in its format as a critical edition of today, and perhaps less refined, but quite similar. So this is something that has been tried and tested, and it has been developed by generations of people. And alongside that, we face the challenge of developing a digital equivalent, and you know, it's like the challenge of the younger sibling. You are always the younger sibling, and you have to somehow make up for this fact.
Yeah, but I'm sure that classical philology will go digital completely, so that's just a question of time. But what is the driving force? I mean, it's just to be part of the digital world. So I mean, that's a need to survive, to keep the scholarship that has been produced in print. But it's not the scholars themselves who are driven by an idea to create produce and represent textual information in new ways. It's just so of course accessibility is a thing, but as long as the methodology doesn't change and the idea of textuality, that's what I mean. So it's nothing to win for a traditional scholar except being fancy or en vogue or able to get funding from funding institutions who force you to produce also a digital result.
There is certainly often less professional recognition attached to digital work than the same work in a paper-based format. So you will remember my slide about academic recognition. Catullus Online has met recognition. It has received some professional compliments, but I think a book would have had the same or more recognition in some forms. In other ways, it has been probably quoted more than a printed book would have been, because some of the scholars who have quoted it are working in Poland, in Hungary, in institutions, or as independent scholars, or at institutions which might not have the budget to buy a highly specialized book on textual criticism. So it has a lot bigger reach and might also be more convenient. Yes, Elisabetta adds in the chat that accessibility would be the biggest advantage. Yes, and
this is possible right now, but it's prevented by the big publishing houses. So at least there is a paywall.
That it's also prevented by academic conventions. So if I would be applying for tenure in the USA, then Catullus Online would be something little. It would not count much or much. As you see, I'm not working in the USA, so it's not.
But I think that's really changing. So I'm very much relaxed because I'm already across the border, and I mean, because of my position also as someone who seems to represent the new age, let's say, I'm contacted very, very often and more often. Do you know a digital classical scholar? Because now universities are trying to catch up, and they are taking more care. Okay, we somehow have to safeguard classical philology on the high level, but it has to go digital. So I mean, departments are really so there will be departments that will take 10 decades or 2 decades more, but I mean, leading institutions now that they have to promote the digital transformation also of the traditional classical philology discipline.
Yes. Yes, one also sees that. I mean, I entered the academic job market in 2008, and then this was my first postdoctoral project, and so I've been in a slightly different situation from France, but yes, it's the situation is likely I think so.
Scusate, posso dire una parola? Parlando.
Sì, prego.
Scusate, io mi rifiuto di parlare in lingua inglese perché dico sempre la stessa cosa, da filologa classica, adesso proprio con la vostra università, no? Stiamo procedendo a una pubblicazione e io mi dovrò cimentare, dico io perché il mio team è diretto da me, sulla filologia classica e sulla metafora del testo omerico, quindi andremo a lavorare tutto per ipotesi e niente di reale. Allora faccio una domanda a voi filologi e soprattutto archivisti dati, no? Allora, io spero di lavorare sulla metrica quantistica per arrivare al formulario, perché il mio intento, la mia ipotesi operativa, un attimo solo e poi perché ho bisogno di aiuto, la mia ipotesi operativa è partire dal formulario di Omero per arrivare ai linguaggi LSP, ai linguaggi professionali, quindi andare a lavorare sulle strutture fisse e quindi partire dalle forme fisse o semifisse, quali sono, un attimo solo dire un attimo, faccio brevemente, arrivare a lì. Quindi la validazione scientifica per l'archiviazione dati e per la formalizzazione abbiamo trovato, abbiamo due metodi, cioè il primo è quello del calcolo elementare, quindi della retorica classica. Il secondo invece è il percorso che va dalla metrica quantistica, dalla fisica quantistica, dalla teoria dei gruppi, arriva con validazione scientifica alla teoria dei grafi. Allora io faccio questo appello a voi, che siete i più bravi, e penso che siete bravi, avete del gratta, e io vi sto seguendo dall'inizio, sto qui buona e vi ascolto. Avete del gratta. Io ci sono arrivata alla validazione scientifica, ci sono arrivata con Dante Alighieri, la validazione scientifica della teoria quantistica. Che ne pensate voi? Questa è la domanda terminale, di voler abbinare quantisticamente i dati di un testo, qual è il testo omerico, alla retorica, alla filologia quantistica moderna. Ok.
Thank you for the compliments, Daniel. It's up to you to find the answer.
Se si tratta di questo, di usare metodi quantitativi, io sono del tutto a favore. Per esempio, per comprendere la sfumatura le sfumature nel vocabolario di uno scrittore antico, questo è molto utile. Lei sa che nel latino classico
certo.
Si presta tanta attenzione alle attestazioni di una parola. Questa parola...
Bravo, grazie. Allora possiamo contare il nostro gruppo su di lei per avere... Ci darà una mano? Noi siamo in contatto con un linguista francese, Michel Planet, che ci sta guidando passo passo per la validazione scientifica del testo. Stiamo lavorando attualmente sul testo latino, anche Catullo, la cerniera Winzip di Catullo. Quindi se lei vuole aggregarsi a noi saremo felicissimi.
Grazie mille, possiamo parlarne
Ok, stop. Grazie.
Grazie a lei. More questions. I did not follow the chat. There have been some further comments. Anyone who wants to speak up? One last point I have here in my notes, a little bit arbitrary from my side. You talk about the reviews of digital editions, and it is very telling that only 2 reviews have been published on your work. So I created a digital scholarly critical edition of a medieval Latin text in 2007. It has been published in 2007 or 8, I can't remember, and then a revised version in 2012. And the first review appeared 10 years after only. So, I mean, that was, I mean, I didn't care too much because I followed other tracks, but it is a difficulty, because how do you review a digital resource or a critical edition or a scholarly edition, which is a digital resource? So you need the 2 competences to evaluate is it well done, or is it so from both sides, the philological side and the technical side. So the pool of potential reviewers is already very, very, very small, a very low number. So that is one problem of the thing. Yeah,
I agree, but you know, reviewing a paper-based edition is also quite challenging, because you review a monograph by starting to read. You started probably at page 1 or at the index or wherever. You end up at the last page probably. You take a lot of notes, think about it, and then you form your opinion. But to review a paper-based edition, so if this would be new, to review it, I would study it. I would study the principles on which it's based, the logic behind it, compare it to the state of the art on that field, conduct some surveys about how it has been grown up, and then form my opinion. And so it's like studying a house. You look at the design, the construction, the materials, various things, and you knock the wall, and in the end you have an opinion about it. Is this a good house or not? It's a construction. It's not a narrative, or not a simple line of reasoning in the sense in which a monograph would be.
And this is exactly the same level of quality you would expect for an excellent digital edition, except that you have this additional problem. You have to evaluate how is the technical and methodological side of things in as regards to the underlying data and the presentation and all the problems that are connected to digital publishing. So this is so over complex that so I mean, you maybe only mentioned there is something which is very useful, but so to have a fully fledged review is a very seldom thing. And that is one reason why friends of mine and colleagues of mine created this review journal for digital scholarly editions, Read or Write. And I regard these articles, these reviews as scholarly articles. They are not just a review. So the review that you have in mind also for book publication is not even there to say it's just a review, which doesn't count if you for you as a scholar. That's not true, but that's even more so, I would say, for reviews of the type that fully take into account the various aspects of a digital resource, a digital scholarly edition.
Yes, and that's an important journal, and a very, very good initiative. Right, is a very good initiative, I believe.
Okay, we reached 22:07. Any further comments, questions, suggestions, or prophecies where classical philology is heading for? And Michael, you have a prophecy here. That's good. Or was it a salute?
Oh, well, more just I think one problem with getting reviewers for online editions is they worry that the edition will change and you'll pretend it never had the problem they found. And then they would have to hope that the Wayback Machine would be able to prove that their criticisms were correct. In other words, an online critical edition can change at any time. And I would hope, and I'm going to try to do this myself, to have a complete list of changes with dates. And just say corrected typos, this line, and this line on such and such a date. Yeah. My text did change. That was a typo. That's a second thought, and so on. And you'd need a whole change log. And to some extent, the Wayback Machine, if it actually covers editions, and if they're kind of HTML, whereas some of mine is a database, and I don't know if you can actually save a database. It's MySQL and PHP, and as I mentioned in the comments, you can turn on the long marks and turn them off, and change your quotation mark styles for different countries and so on. So I'm thinking that's probably not on the Wayback Machine. So and it would get very unpleasant if your criticisms of something could be made to look like they were fake. And because an online edition is a moving target. I mean, the advantage of an online edition is you can have an infinite number of editions, and I'm thinking I should probably number mine and say, okay, this is version 2.11, and if you printed it out or something. And that's the other problem is online editions. If they're easily printable, what's the point of being online? If they're not easily printable,
not a digital edition problem.
So the slipperiness of them is a problem with attracting reviewers.
It's not a problem, but I think it's a challenge. It's the nature of the digital medium.
A challenge.
And so part of the guidelines of Reader, for example, is you are obliged to trigger the Internet Archive to create a scan of the resource you are reviewing. So at the moment you are reviewing it, and include ideally also a screenshot. And of course it is a different way of reviewing a resource, which is more accompanying a process, because a digital resource is never finished and then you give the verdict, this is good, this is bad, or you replace it by the next edition 20 years after, because then it's usually when new editions are being created. But these are resources that grow, and this is just a snapshot in the time when you process it, and should be supportive also to improve the resource. So it is actually a success of a review of a digital resource if the resource then changes. So, and we try to collect evidences for this. So if editors then are happy and say, thank you for all these constructive criticism. The next version of our edition will have several improvements. Thank you to your comments and suggestions. So that is then scholarship at its best, I would say. It's not just about producing, delivering a product, judging it, and then having to live with it, but so to be part of a process of a community that works on improving scholarly resources. So it's also a change in culture, communication, and the process of scholarship is just a different one, which is makes traditional scholars insecure because they want their fixed points of references. We have to find other ways, methods, routines, other points of stability to make sure our references are valid over time. But they change because that's the nature of the medium.
Oh, I agree with you, but I'm just saying why I think it would repel a lot of people.
Yeah, you're right. Absolutely.
Yes,
absolutely.
And I think we agree. And I'm sorry, I didn't catch, what is the name of your journal that reviews electronic things?
Reader, so like laugh in Latin, or ride. R-I-D-E.
Oh, just read. Oh, I've seen it. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Read. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, I have seen that. Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody.